might want to come back and look at it later. I want to give you a couple of pieces of information about how we do the webinars. One is that if you have any questions, there's a question section where you can post questions to me that I'll try and answer throughout the webinar. There are handouts, so there are 4 handouts in the GoToWebinar that you can download with helpful information. There will also be some polling questions that I may ask you some questions to make sure I understand who's in the audience and what your interests are. My name is Ted Elliott. I am the CEO of Job Science. Hopefully you can see my screen, and I'm excited to get started. I'd also like to just thank, before we get too deep into the webinar, our customers and our investors here at Job Science who make our webinars possible and allow us to create content like today that we're going to share with you that I hope will be of great interest and assist you in how you're doing your recruiting. To give you a little idea of what our mission in Job Science is that we fundamentally believe that the workforce is changing, and as a result, recruiters need to think differently and come up with new ways to be an effective recruiter, whether that's through automation, through recruitment marketing, through new approaches, and ultimately that is going to occur because the majority of the global workforce is going to move to contingent working over the next 10 to 15 years. Not the majority, sorry. We're going to move to about 40% of the workforce being contingent. And this is largely occurring because of events like the baby boomers leaving the workforce. So what do you do when you're a recruiter and you have less and less qualified candidates, more and more people applying for jobs who aren't qualified, and less time and less resources? Well, you have to start thinking about new ways to do things. So hopefully what we'll do today is talk about some of those new ways to do things, show you some ways to do them, and it will be interesting. Now, I have a quick question for everybody in the audience. I just want to get a sense, before I present the material, how many of the folks on the line are familiar with Salesforce.com and understand Salesforce, because that will help me in terms of how I explain things and explain how to get the most out of some of the approaches that we're throwing out there. I see about half of you have answered my poll, and if we could get as much participation as possible, we'll just make it so that I can provide you better content and make this a little more interesting. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and share the results with you. About 74% of the folks who are on today's call have used Salesforce.com. About 26% haven't. So for those of you who are new to the Salesforce.com ecosystem, Job Science is completely built on Salesforce.com, and we take advantage of a lot of the tools that Salesforce provides. So I'm going to be showing some of those tools that were really built originally for sales and marketing that we're now using for recruiting. So let's jump into today's agenda. I'm going to walk through kind of 4 concepts today. One is what do I mean by workflow? What workflow tools are available to users? How do I build workflow? How do I think about workflow? How would I deploy workflow? What is an automation strategy? Why would I want to use automation in my recruiting process? Why would it benefit me, and how would I actually design an automation process that would assist my business? Then what I'm going to do is we're going to go into some use cases of how automation and workflow can automate processes that you have and decrease the amount of time that it takes to do recruiting. And then finally, I put together a little checklist of things to do if you're interested in trying to build automation into your recruitment process for you to think about, so that you have a basis to go back and figure out how you would deploy or come up with processes to really assist you in your recruitment. Now, again, just to remind everyone, if you have any questions as we're going along, or you can't hear my audio, or sometimes people say that I talk a little too fast because I get really excited, I'd encourage you to go ahead and post questions into the question section. I will from time to time go to the question section to try and figure out what you're asking and make sure that we're addressing your interest as we go forward. All right, one other question for those of you who have used Salesforce. How many of you are familiar with the process builder in Salesforce and have actually built out a workflow and process on your own? And I'm just going to take a second to get some responses there and see who has used workflow and process before we go ahead and get into that. I'll go ahead and share those results. So it looks like most of the people on today's call have not actually used Process Builder. So that's great. There's a lot for you to learn for those of you who have used it hopefully I will have some good information for you. Raul Ramus, I didn't exactly understand your question, but I see that you said I am. So hopefully you know where it is, and I can hit up your questions as they come along. So let's go a little further in this, and let's talk about what tools we're going to discuss today. And just to give everyone a background, I'd love to get your feedback on what you think of our new graphics. But Job Science is doing a new release on July 11th, and we're calling it the Shark release because we're trying to take a bite out of recruitment. So you can see our new logo for our summer edition is up there in the corner. We haven't really released it to anyone yet, so this is the first time that we're presenting it. And then Job Science just completed a sailboat race in Cowes, England last week. So this is the Job Science Shark team in the background. So we're working a little sailing, a little summer into everything we're doing, and thought it would make things a little fresher. So let's go ahead and talk about workflow. What is standard workflow that you can use to drive process? Usually historical workflow was that you have a single object or table like a job application or a contact record, and when some event occurs, that triggers an automated workflow. So for example, let's say that I have a candidate and I change what city they're in. I could automate an email to go out to them that says, hey, please confirm that in fact the city you live in has changed. So very flat, very granular, and usually the type of workflow that I could have created historically would have been generating a task to remind someone to do something, generating an email, asking someone to do something, or updating a field automatically. So if I update a state, maybe it automatically updates the country. So what maybe some of you may have remembered as macros, depending on how old you are and how long you've been working with computing. I think I aged myself the other day when I said to someone, oh, it's just like printing out a mail merge. And two of the folks who work with me are like, what do you mean printing out a mail merge? So think of traditional workflow as being very flat and very simple. And at least if you're a Salesforce user or a Job Science user, the way you would get to this traditional workflow is to go into your setup menu and type in work, and it would bring up a workflow menu, and you'd be able to create processes. Now I have a sample process that I just wanted to show as an example is here. I have a rule, which is the basis for my trigger or my event occurring that kicks off my workflow. And when that rule kicks off, I immediately generate an email alert. I immediately generate a field update. I immediately generate an outbound message. An outbound message might be a message from one computer to another computer, telling the computer to do something. So maybe I have an API feed that I need to send to another machine, like, for example, let's say I'm using Job Science for sourcing, but I want to send a message to Taleo. When I find a candidate, I might force that candidate data out of the system when a rule triggers. What I can also do with rule is create time-based workflow. So let's say that a candidate applies for a job and I want the system to reject them, but I don't necessarily want them to get that rejection letter immediately. I don't want them, when they're applying for a job at 2 a.m., to get the rejection at 2:01 a.m. Because I don't want them to necessarily think that they haven't been looked at by a human. Although the human would have made the same decision, I just don't want to be that impersonal. So I can set up time flow rules that delay sending out communication. Where this can also be helpful is for those of you who are on the call who are interested in recruitment marketing automation, where you want to do drip campaigns. You can literally put people in a criteria where a workflow kicks off, and it might send them an email on day 14, it might send them an email on day 21, it might send them an email on day 90. Now, in traditional workflow, it would just keep doing that, and it wouldn't have any logic for figuring out why not to do something. So let's say that I want to do a drip campaign with email, where I said, I'm going to build a list, and as long as you qualify for the workflow rule, I'm going to send you an email every 60 days. But if you actually do something that tells me not to send you any email, I want to stop sending you email. Traditional workflow in Salesforce didn't allow you to do that. So what we're going to talk about for just a second is something called Process Builder. And what Process Builder is a way to put more rules and more process in, so that if someone actually responds to your email campaign, you might have a stop rule that says, let's stop emailing those people, let's stop bugging them. And it gives you a smarter way to do campaigns. So the second tool that we'll be talking about today, and of course I'll go into more detail about this, is Process Builder. And Process Builder allows you to do things like, hey, someone applies for a job, I want to go update something on their contact record. I want to also go update something on their application record. I want to go update something in multiple places in the system that weren't traditionally able to be addressed in standard workflow. Now with the new process builder, I can do that. Maybe I want to send out a chatter message to people. I don't know, for those of you who don't use Salesforce, chatter is very much like using a feed in Facebook. And so maybe I want to send out a message to people via chatter that they're going to get on their phone that says, hey, a great candidate just applied for a job. I think you should take a look at them. Those are the things that we can do in Process Builder. Now, how is Process Builder different than traditional workflow? Well, at its core, it's a visual process. And what's great about this visual process is it forces you to think about what the actions might be. So I'm going to walk you through an example of a process that I built that I was pretty excited by, that I thought would help me manage how I communicate to candidates. So first off, I said when an application record gets created, so that's when someone applies for a job. So when it's created, I want to send out a communication 3 days after they apply for a job. However, if they're automatically rejected, I don't want to send them the first communication 3 days after saying I'm going to follow up with them. I want to send them an email saying I've rejected you. But maybe I don't want that rejection to go out the day they applied or the minute they applied, so I put some time-based workflow to change that. Maybe there's a reason why I rejected them, and when there's a reason I rejected them, I wanted to go update their contact record to indicate that they're not touchable or don't market to them anymore, or maybe there's someone who I want to actually market to, but I didn't choose them for the job they applied to. So understanding those rules, what the system can do is bucket the data in the right direction. And once it buckets that data in the right direction, that gives you the ability to make better decisions. So automation is really not about replacing your role as the recruiter. Automation is about making your role as the recruiter not do the monotonous stuff that was never fun to do in the first place. So what we want you guys to be doing as recruiters is doing the fun stuff, talking to candidates, engaging people, and to the extent we can automate the unfun stuff, you're going to be more effective. So let's take a look at how would one go ahead and build an automation process. Again, if anyone has any questions as we're going along, or if I'm talking in gibberish, please let me know. The purpose of these TED Talks is to make it fun for you. So so basically, what would I do in the event that I wanted to actually build automation? Well, first off, I need to stop before I build any tools, and I need to think about what am I actually trying to achieve. So what I tried to do is come up with 3 examples of things that you could automate in your recruiting process that might help you save time. And what I thought we could do is walk through each of those 3 examples. And again, if you have questions as we're going along, we can certainly address those questions. But I wanted to suggest some things you can do. So let's look at the concept of application scoring. So someone applies for a job with my organization or sees one of my ads. Now I can create an applicant score. In the new job science release that will be out, we'll be announcing it on the 11th. When someone applies for a job, we're going to have something called the job science score, which is an algorithm that we've written that automatically scores your applicant. And what you can do is set a threshold. So if the applicant scores above a certain rate, you could automatically reject them. Below a certain rate, you could automatically reject them. Above a certain rate, you could automatically maybe send them an email. What type of email might you send them? One of the things that we found has been really effective, and I talked about this in my last TED Talk, is a tool called Calendly. And what Calendly allows you to do is send someone a link that says, this is when I'm available to talk. So imagine that you get an applicant who has a score of 90 out of 100, and you have the system automatically send them an email when they apply that says, hey, I just looked at your application. I'm really interested in having a phone call. Click here to see when I'm available for a phone screen and grab a time. Then it would automatically schedule on your calendar a time that you can do a phone screen. Instead of you doing chase down to the candidates, it's automatically queuing you up to have phone screens with great candidates without having to do any of that initial screening. But you at least know that any of the candidates who apply for a job were 90 or better. Now, some people might say, I'm not sure I want to trust an artificial intelligence score. I'm not sure I want to trust that algorithm. So what we recently did, and I'll show this shortly in today's webinar, what we recently did with one of our clients is we have something called the Job Science Knockout Questions. And we came up with 4 knockout questions, and we gave them a weighted score for each question. And if the candidate didn't hit a certain score, they were rejected. So the workflow automatically marked their application rejected. It automatically sent them an email thanking them for applying, but telling them to reconsider them for another job. But if they actually hit the right score, it sent them a calendar link to ask them to see if they wanted to have an interview. Now, what that does is it reduces, especially where you have high volumes of applications, it reduces 70 to 80% of your candidate flow, but it increases the total number of candidate engagements you're having because you're not having to schedule calls. So those two simple maneuvers really help you. Now, that shows you how you can use applicant scoring and communication. Certainly, if you reject someone, you can automatically send them a message. What can you also do? Well, maybe after you have that counter event, you might actually want to send them a survey. How did you think the interview went? Or thanks for having the interview with me. So why not automate that follow-up just to be a little more personal, because what happens in our day as recruiters is we run out of time to follow up with people. But these little micro moments where we can engage people are the difference when you're doing, and really you have to think about this as a marketer, is the difference of being remembered or being forgotten. Or when I'm like, well, wow, should I really go work with those guys? Well, you know, it was so nice. No one else sent me a thank you note afterwards, or no one asked me what I thought of the process, and I want to be heard. I want to be a participant in the process. So those are some examples of where you can use this for applicant scoring, communication, follow-up. What are some other examples of workflow? Okay, so you have a candidate you're looking at, and you want to screen them. So maybe you check off a box in their record that says screen me. What if that kicked off a workflow that sent them an email asking them to provide 3 references? Maybe it also sent you an alert if they didn't provide 3 references within, let's say, a day. Let's say that you wanted, once they provided references, for it to automatically queue you up, especially if you automatically score the references using the workflow. So you send out, they provide you 3 references. The candidate gives you the names of 3 people. The system automatically workflows out an email to the candidates' references, asking them to rate them. As long as the ratings come above a certain score, it automatically updates the contact record, which then sends an email request to the candidate asking if you can schedule an interview, and so, sends that Calendly link out to them again, asking them a time that they could do an interview. Once they've done the interview and you check off the box they've done the interview, it would send them a thank you note saying that you're going to stay in touch shortly, or that you're going to follow up depending on how you rated how the interview went. By putting some basic automation in these processes, it is going to make your overall communication with a candidate improve massively. The third use case that you might think about as you're thinking about, well, how would I use automation to change my day to make my business or my recruiting process better, is in marketing. So we talked about the example earlier in the webinar of using a score to then do drip campaigns. So I've got candidates in my resume database. What if those candidates in my database have not been touched for 90 days? Well, maybe once they go over 90 days of not being touched, I want to send them automatically an email campaign that asks them to update their information in a survey. Or maybe if they were a candidate who was coded as a hot candidate, I say, hey, I'd just like to do a phone screen to touch base with you. One of the examples I showed in my last TED Talk was where we took someone's resume database that had over 7,000 nurses, and we simply sent out an email campaign to nurses that we determined were marketable to, but we hadn't hired, sending those nurses an email asking them if they wanted to be engaged. What we got was over a 33% response rate of nurses who were really hard to find coming back and saying, yeah, they did want to be engaged. What I can also do with workflow is by using Chatter, I can make suggestions. So let's say that you decide that if a resume in your system hasn't been touched for 45 days, you want to alert the owner that the chances that this candidate is going away and you'll never be able to use them again, it's going to go way up. You can create time-based scoring. And you can define your own half-lives in time-based scoring to make suggestions to recruiters. Hey, no one has looked at this application in the last 48 hours. No manager has responded to you on this application in the last 40 hours. Suggest to the recruiter, we suggest you call the manager. No one has looked at this candidate for 90 days. We suggest that you either send them an email or you archive them out of your system so that you don't have candidate data that you don't have a purpose for. So let's look at one of my future topics that we're going to cover, not in next month's webinar, but the webinar after that, is the new global data protection rules from the EU. You're going to have to use things like workflow to define for you when has someone's data been in your system and untouched for a certain amount of time that would warrant you sending them an email, asking them if they still want to be engaged by you, creating a log of the engagement so that you can show for compliance purposes that you've engaged them, and if they don't want to be engaged, would remind you to remove them from your system. So those are kind of 3 sample examples of ways that you can use workflow to really change your day. Now, I think that there was a question from Joyce. Would you please repeat what you said about engaging the nurses and the emailing capability there? Sure, Joyce. Thanks for that question. So what I was referring to is if you're sitting on a database of candidates and the majority of those candidates you haven't touched in some time, you can either use workflow or you can build short lists in job science to do campaigning to them. And generally when you do a campaign, you want to drive them to an action. So what I have a webinar, and certainly we'll share the links with everybody for the webinars that we've done because we record all these webinars, is we worked with a hospital to make sure that any candidate who had been in their database had not been marked as not marketable, which means that that was a candidate that they didn't want to ever touch again, but they hadn't hired. We put on a weekly campaign where we send out emails, not to the whole database, but some portion of the database based on the age of the record, saying, hey, we haven't talked to you in some time, we're interested in talking to you, click here so that we can set up a quick call to talk about your career. We did that, and we were getting consistently on a weekly basis 33 to 40% response rates of nurses automatically scheduling themselves for phone screens with the hospital, to the point where the hospital had so many new nurses coming in for interviews that they actually had to bring in the hiring managers into the process and put their calendars in the schedule so that the hiring managers were doing the screening because they needed more qualified people to talk to those nurses again. So Joyce, hopefully I answered your question and was able to slow that down a bit. Again, there's a webinar that covers that whole topic. But what I really want to stretch your minds with this morning is just the whole concept of what are those little things in my day that if I could automate them, I would free up an hour, free up 2 hours. I would really change my life, and it would be a lot more fun because I get to do the fun stuff. So as you think about, well, what would that tend? I don't get you, man. It's too complicated. What am I really talking about? What is the key event that occurs that forces you to do something? When someone applies for a job, when a resume doesn't get looked at. Think about key events in your life that if you had unlimited time, you'd be able to deal with all those key events. Then define, okay, well, even when that key event occurs, I'm not sure that I want to email someone who I rejected who I never want to talk to again. So what are the filters or the screens you want to put on the trigger? Okay, someone applies for a job and their score isn't high enough. I want to filter people into one bucket if their score isn't high enough, into another bucket if their score is high enough. And then finally, what is the update that you want the system to automate? So do you want it to send an automated message? Do you want it to alert someone on your team? Do you want a reminder? Do you want to send a survey to someone? Do you want to invite them to a calendared event? What is something that will actually help them? So, so hopefully, as you're thinking about this, I'll give you one more kind of concrete example of where I'm going with this. So let's go in and take a use case. And I know there's a question about archive that I'll address at the end, but I want to keep it going with the use case, and then we'll go into some more examples. So here is an example of automatically screening candidates out of the process if they don't meet your minimum criteria. And we believe that you can easily eliminate 70% of the candidates, probably no less than 50% of the candidates, by applying some scoring automation into your recruiting process. So what would an example of that be? I'm applying for a job as a clerical worker in a medical setting. When I apply for that job, I have 4 questions. One question is, have you worked in a medical setting before? If I answer yes, I get 10 points. If I answer no, I get 0 points. The next question might be, how many jobs have you had in the last 5 years? If I answer I've had 1 job, I get 10 points. If I answer that I have 2 jobs, I get 8 points. If I answer that I have had 10 jobs in the last 5 years, I get 0 points. My next question might be, do you have any transcription experience or experience with insurance? Something specific to the job. Again, putting scores in. So once I score that application, I will set a threshold of what it means to pass and what it means to fail. If someone passes, I might go deeper and say, well, you're a high score passer, so I'm going to actually send you an email asking you to schedule a meeting with me, where instead of asking you to call me and going back and forth trying to schedule something, I'm simply going to send you a link that you can click on to schedule something with me. On the other hand, if I'm a medium scorer, so I'm okay, but I'm not perfect for the job, maybe I'm going to put you in the queue, but I'm going to rate you as a medium consideration because I really want to focus all my time to my top scoring candidates. But what I want my boss to see, or I want to see my managers to see when I'm doing the recruiting, is to see, hey, these are the candidates I've done phone screens with, or I've scheduled phone screens. These are the candidates that I'm putting kind of in my reserve. Oh, and by the way, these are the candidates who didn't meet our minimum criteria, so I marked their application rejected. I didn't have to go actually do that for each application. The system did it for me. And then I delayed my response to the candidates by at least 24 hours because I didn't want them to think that I, was a jerk or it was being done by a machine. I sent them a nice rejection letter. And depending on how low their score was, maybe I marked them as not marketable to, or if their score was not horrible or a reason not to consider them in the future, I didn't mark them as not marketable. So what I would recommend is that if you're serious about wanting to use automation and really save time, and this is really about saving time at the end of the day and doing a better job, before you even try and create a workflow, you need to sit down with a piece of paper and think through exactly what you want to have happen. And once you do that, it will make it so much easier to then go ahead and automate. Here's another automation that I created that's a different example, which is this example that I think there was a question about when someone said archive, what do I mean? So I strongly believe that most recruiters are managers of a, and sorry to use a negative graphic term, a bowl of dead fish. If you think about your resume databases, 70 to 80% of your resume database are dead fish, people who probably will never, ever, ever be an applicant that you'll hire. Not necessarily because they weren't qualified, but because you let them stagnate in the fishbowl. And so if you reach them by email and they don't want to be communicated to or they don't respond to you, while everyone thinks, well, we should keep these people in our database, you may be better off simply backing up their data because you can export it out on job sites easily, backing them up for compliance purposes, but removing them from your system. Because the more candidates that you have in your database that you go search for that you have zero chance of ever having them respond to you, and generally, if you send someone 11 emails and they don't respond to you, they're not going to respond on the 12th email. Take them out of your database so that your database has more fresh air in it for the fish that are living. Now, one of the ways so hopefully I answered that archiving question. I also think that when you look at the global data protection rules that are going to go into effect on May 18th of 2018 in the EU, and even if you're a US recruiter, they could impact you. What you need to start thinking about is that you're going to be forced to archive data and take data out of your system and remove it because candidates are going to have a lot more rights to ask you to remove their data from your system. So it's a really good time, 7 to 8 months out to start thinking about, well, how are we going to automate as much of this process as possible so that we're in a position that we're keeping the live fish in the bowl so that when we go fishing, we catch something we want. Now, this use case that I have up here for automated marketing talks about a contact being created and the system is checking their record on a regular basis. So there's a workflow saying every 30 days I'm going to come to this record to see if anyone's looked at it. And if no one has looked at it, then I'm going to send the candidate an email to ask them to respond to me. And if they don't respond to me, I'm going to send them another email after 30 days and so on and so on. And I might set a rule that after 11 emails, I'm going to send a flag to the recruiter saying we think you should archive this person, or we think that they should be marked as inactive so that we don't find them anymore when we're doing searches. But basically what you want to do is why not have the system make your fishbowl clean? So for any of you who've ever had fish, unless you want them to do the side stroke, you got to clean that fishbowl on a regular basis. Well, think about your database as how do I clean it on a regular basis and make it work for me? So we've talked about sort of two different use cases. What I thought we'd do is go in and literally yesterday I sat with a recruiter and I didn't do it for them. They did it for themselves. We actually went and we built a workflow together. So what I thought I would do today is show you guys an example of how someone with no experience that had never built a workflow before was able to do that on their own. So I'm going to go ahead and share a video with you on that. Just give me 1 second and I will put the workflow. What I thought I'd do is actually show you a couple of other examples of where we have these. So here I've got a couple of workflows. One of them is called applicant status score. So we're going to go into that one because I want everyone to be able to see the left-hand side of the screen. And here you see I have an application, and when it has a status change, it kicks off different values. Now, hopefully everyone is seeing my screen and not the wrong screen. Let me just go make sure I've got it on the right screen. There we go. And so this is an example of how I'm able to build these automations. And the automations are quite simple, and you can build them for all types of things. Now, when you build them, again, it can send off an email, or it can send off a task, or it can send off a chatter message. One of the things I would encourage anyone on today's call to consider is going to something called trailhead.salesforce.com. And if this is something that you're really interested in doing, you can actually get a badge for how to build process. And so what it will do is take you through a course that literally walks you through exactly how to do this. Now, if you said, hey, I really don't have time to learn how to do all this stuff, I'd like someone to do this for me, yes, you could certainly reach out to the Job Science Professional Services team. But even if you do that, I would strongly recommend that you think through what you want your process to be so that we know what you want us to automate for you and we do it in a logical manner. So it's really a matter of defining, what you want that process to look like. So let's take a quick look at the checklist of the types of things that you would want to do in order to make sure that you can successfully set up your own workflow. So we're back to that team job science. So there are what I call pre-launch activities before you build the workflow, and there are post-launch activities. So the pre-launch activity is don't go build automated workflow for events that happen once a month. And what I mean is that if you don't have a high enough volume of transactions, automation will actually cost you more time than it will save you. In areas where the event occurs every day over and over again, such as people applying for a job, or people answering application questions, or people having to get their references checked, things that you're doing on a regular basis that are over and over again, those are areas where automation is going to help you the most. The second is, what are the screening questions that are objective? So what are filters that you can apply that are not subjective but are very objective? Do you have a nursing license in the state of California? That is an objective question. You either do or you don't. How many years of experience do you have? You either do or you don't. Can you provide me 3 references? They either do or they don't. In automation, trying to come up with, what do you think of the color purple? That it would be a subjective question. What would be very hard for us to create an automation or a filtered events against. So do I have a high enough volume of transactions? And do I have something that is clearly an objective standard that I can use as my criteria? Then, where can you score data to prioritize your activity? So where when you build these screening criteria, can you determine what goes into bucket A versus what goes into bucket C versus what goes into, whatever other buckets you might have? The fourth standard is, how are you going to measure if this is actually helping you? So in the case of the video you just saw from Washington Regional, where we're building the workflow, our objective is to decrease the applications for high volume positions that have to be looked at by 60%. If we can make it so that 60% of the candidates who are taking up the majority of the time looking at candidates that are for low-level jobs, where we're getting plenty of candidates, are screened down to the process in an automated manner, we can free up 4 hours a week, 5 hours a week of a recruiter's time to spend on the positions that are harder to fill, that require more action. Another example where automation can help you is the number of phone calls that a recruiter in a staffing company or in a corporate environment has to place back and forth with a candidate to get them on the phone for a phone screen. By automatically sending them a hyperlink that takes them right to a calendar and lets them schedule a meeting with you, you can quickly automate that process and save yourself a lot of time. Okay, so you go ahead and you do that, you build your workflow. What do you do afterwards? Well, you need to go back on a regular basis and track the volume of automated actions. You need to track the number of times your workflow is actually being used, and you need to go back and see if your KPI is actually being achieved. If it's not, you want to make sure that you kill off those workflows or you don't do it. The type of ROI that we think that you should be able to get from automation is to at least take 50% of the busy work that you do and remove it. Take a lot of the time it takes to track setting up meetings and coordinating with people, and take them out of your day. And then figure out how you can get more reach and access more candidates by using these processes so that you can spend more of your time talking to the people that you want to talk to. Now, on that note, talking to people that want to talk to me, I've got a couple questions that people have hit me with, and I'd like to try and address those questions if that's okay. And this is a good time, if you haven't posted a question, you want to post a question to me to get your questions in the queue, because I'll try and answer as many of them as I can, but I'm going to limit to just a certain number of questions. So let me open up the questions and get started. So I think I answered Joyce's questions earlier. I thought, Sean, you had asked me about archiving. I think I addressed that. I had another question is, not sure if this is intentional, but the right side of the screen was cut off. It wasn't intentional, Skylar, so I apologize for that. That's why I decided to pop into the live portion of the demo, so thanks for pointing that out. There's another question, which is, how hard is this actually to do, Ted? You make it sound simple. It's really not that hard, but it will require that you either get some training or that you do some thinking. And what I mean by the thinking part is laying out what you want to achieve, and then if you need assistance setting up these process builder flows, that's a good time to reach out to Job Science, and probably a couple-hour project, an hour or 2-hour project, we can help you do that. Lisa asked the question, does Job Science sync with Outlook calendars for scheduling purposes? So Lisa, you can use the native Salesforce calendar sync that's greatly improved in this latest edition to sync your calendars. However, the tool that I'm recommending that you think about using is a tool called Calendly. It's a third-party tool, and what it is specifically built around is scheduling and making it easier for third parties that don't have access to your calendar to grab times. So the way you use a tool like that is that you say, these are the 5 times I'm available to do phone screens this week. It builds that into a hyperlink, and then when you send that link to people, as people take time off your calendar, it blocks that time off. Now, I found that is really a great use of a resource, because when you tie that to automation, the system can go back and forth with you and make it quite easy. Raul asked a question, which is, I found it time-consuming to create SF email with tables and calling fields from objects. Is there any tool in AppExchange that makes it easier? Raul, I don't think there's any tool that really makes it that much easier. What I usually do is I define the fields that I want to use, and I create a base template, so that in the future all I have to do is clone the template that I've created and change the language. Lisa, it sounds like I was mumbling. My wife accused me of talking too fast and mumbling all the time. So the tool that I was referring to is called Calendly. It's C-A-L-E-N-D-L-Y. I'll let you know that in the Job Science release that will come up in our next cycle, which will be November, because we have an upcoming release on July 11th, so hopefully everyone signed up to hear about that release. The next release, we're actually building a calendar tool just like Calendly, but I think it's such a great thing to do, and if you want to test it out, it's so inexpensive. It's like $19 a month to have this tool, and it is a complete game changer when it comes to the amount of time it takes to go back and forth with candidates to schedule meetings. So I'm going to cut things off here, just because I think that I've taken a little more of everyone's time than they expected. Wanted to thank you so much for being part of the webinar, and if you wouldn't mind answering the survey to tell me what you thought about today's presentation, would appreciate it. Go have a great 4th of July, and please join us on July 11th, the week of July 11th, for our webinar series on the new Job Science release. Have a great day.